And so it was the mid-afternoon, and I said to my TA that I had in my class, I think I'm going to head home. I just don't feel 100%. And I got in my car and I drove home, and that was the end of what I remember. So everything I'm going to tell you now is what has been told to me.
Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magecha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Julie Gage. Hi, Julie, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in today. And I know that for you, that's not always an easy task to get to different places. We were introduced by a dear friend of mine, actually, who said that you would be absolutely wonderful on the podcast, and you've never shared your story previously in terms of what's happened.
No, that's correct. Apart from obviously to other amputees.
Yeah. So this is the first public broadcast for Julie.
That is correct, yes.
So we're going to kick off with a question of, who is Julie?
I suppose an Australian teacher living and enjoying being in the UK.
Amazing. And you've been in the UK for?
30,
almost
3 years
30,
this year.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
And you left the sun to come here.
Yes.
So tell me about how you grew up in Australia, what it was like, and what ultimately led you to want to come to the UK.
Yeah. So I was originally, I was born in Sydney, and my father passed away when I was 2, and my mother remarried, and we moved to the country following my stepfather's job as an ambulance officer. And my mother was a trained nursing sister. And we lived in a very tiny town called Ardlethan, which was halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, with a population of 350.
350 people?
350 was the total population of the small town. And the town existed because there was a tin mine just outside of the town. And both my parents basically ran the Ardlethan Medical Centre between the two of them, ambulance and nursing sister. And I went to a central school that had a very small population of children. There were 7 in my class. And when I turned 16, the school ended, and I ended up at an agricultural boarding school in Sydney, where I was given the isolated children's allowance because I had come from a tiny, tiny little country town. And that's where I spent the last 2 years. And then I met some really fantastic teachers who encouraged me to become a teacher. And that's how I ended up going to university and becoming a teacher.
And did you want to go to university? Was that an ambition, or was it through?
Well, no, actually. I was going to become a nurse, the same as my mother. But I think I had a natural, not gift, that's probably not the word, but I was in a dormitory, and I had year 9s I was in charge of a year 9 dormitory, and I was helping them a lot with homework and all their studies. And that's when the teachers that I met, who were residential teachers living on the premises, said you'd make a really great teacher. And so I decided that that was the way forward.
What was childhood like?
A lot of country experiences, going to friends' houses. I did a lot of sport, played a lot of sport. I played Aussie rules. I learned how to play Aussie rules, which is a combination of football and rugby. That's probably how I could put the two together. But I did lots of swimming, tennis. I played netball. And in my later teenage years, I became a shot putter. And okay. I shot put for the region, and then I took part in national tournaments.
Oh, amazing.
Until I went to college, actually.
And how do you think your early experiences come to play in who you are today?
Early experiences, I suppose family was quite important. I've got 2 sisters and a brother, and I was the youngest. And when my father passed away, our extended family became very important. So I think going to their places and being looked after by them and having all my cousins around me and then becoming, friends with like the neighborhood. I think I became quite like community orientated and in fact probably fitted well into being a school teacher and having that community around me. So I'm pretty sure that influenced my way forward.
So let's talk about when you got to the UK.
Yeah.
What was that 1 year supposed to be like?
That 1 year was filled with travel, and that's thanks to a family that I lived in a studio in the garden in Hampstead. And that year, the boy I was helping to look after turned 5, and I visited all of the local schools in Hampstead to see what school would fit him. And one of the schools that I went to and met a head teacher called Pam Fitzpatrick, I immediately thought this is the best school for him. And in fact, best school for me in terms of just the history of the building and history of the school and her personality. And I was going to return to Australia, and the family I was living with suggested that I did some casual supply teaching to see what teaching was like in the UK. And I went to Pam and I said, have you got a couple of days a week that I could do some casual supply teaching? And she said, yes. Could you please come tomorrow? I need you in year 6. And year 6 was a bit daunting for me then because I'd been teaching 5-year-olds back in Australia.
And year 6, for anyone who isn't aware, is
they're 10 turning 11.
10 turning
it's
11.
The year before they go to high school, secondary school.
Okay.
And I said, what, year 6 tomorrow? I said, but I'm normally, in charge of 5-year-olds. And she said, no, that's where I need you. Is that okay? And I was thrown in the deep end, but I loved it. So.
And what were you teaching year 6s?
Everything. So maths, English, science. The only things I didn't have to teach was music, and we had PE coaches. But I was quite happy to teach PE. I just wasn't happy with the music side of it. So I was quite pleased by that.
Okay.
So all the subjects, history. And that was the other thing, is that I'd learnt Australian history in Australia, which was all about gold mining and convicts.
Yeah.
And I had to learn about Victorians and Tudors, and I knew nothing about that. So there was a huge learning curve.
In day 1.
In day 1, when I was thrown into, I was teaching the Victorians, and I had I knew who Queen Victoria was, but I knew no other history whatsoever.
So what happens for the next 20 years? Before you retire? Yeah.
My next chapter was to, in fact, it was write a letter back to Australia to say I was staying in England. That was the first hurdle.
The letter, I love this. You had to write a letter.
Yes, because it was 35 years ago. So I had to write a formal letter, no email, no text message. In fact, there was no mobile phone until the mid to late 90s. And in fact, it was expensive to phone Australia. And so the easiest way was to write a letter. In fact, everything was about letter writing back in those days. And that was the biggest decision, I think, of my life, was to stay. And the next hurdle was obviously to get a visa. But thanks to my grandmother that was born in Scotland and migrated back in the early 1920s, I was able to get a right to abode. And that's how I'm actually legally able to stay in this country.
And so you started teaching. How long were you at that school?
Well, actually, I was only at that school for the first year. Mm-hmm. And the head teacher asked me to go across the road to another school where her daughter was in year 6, because the year 6 teacher had become the head and they needed a teacher to fill that position. So I went across the road to her daughter's school, and I actually taught her daughter for a year. And then at the end of that year, I was asked, could I come back to New End? And that's where I spent the next 27 years.
You spent 27 years
27
in the same
years
school.
At the same school. I took on lots of roles. I'd become like the the teacher on the governing body, and I'd become the PE coordinator. And at one point I was the IT coordinator. In fact, I'd taken on quite a lot of roles: geography, history, English at one point, maths. And then as time went on, I stuck to just the 2 roles, which was year 6 teacher and PE coordinator.
So clearly you liked moving from age 5, to year 6,
I
which
did.
was age 10. So those 5 years difference, you actually appreciated and stayed with them for 27 years in the same school. That's just remarkable.
And I would be there now if I did not get sick.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's take you to that point in time. What happened?
Well, I thought that I had a head cold, and I had previously cut my foot in Thailand on the beach, and I really don't know what I cut my foot on. So I did have what they called a marine wound, which apparently got infected, except I didn't know any of this because I fell into what's called a septic delirium.
So before we go into the actual what happened,
Oh, okay.
were you at school? Because I recall
I was at school.
You were at school. So you'd been on holiday, you'd been to Thailand, you were at school. So let's start from that moment.
From that moment, I was at school at my desk, actually, making a Captain Cook hat for World Book Day, feeling very unwell, and kept saying to the children in my class, is anyone else cold? And at this point, I was wearing my coat and scarf and a beanie, a bobble hat. And they kept saying, no, it's quite warm in here. Are you all right? And I said, actually, I'm not feeling 100%. And so it was the mid-afternoon, and I said to my TA that I had in my class, I think I'm going to head home. I just don't feel 100%. And I got in my car and I drove home, and that was the end of what I remember. Okay. So everything I'm going to tell you now is what has been told to me. So I got home and I think I went straight to bed.
When was this?
This was 5 years ago.
Okay.
March 5 years ago. And I knew that I had a head cold, which was like the flu, and I had all the symptoms of the flu. And I thought, oh, I've got the flu, and I'll have a couple of days rest. And what happened was I fell into this septic delirium, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I wasn't ringing school to say, hey, I'm not coming into school. Normally you ring every day and you say, I'm not well enough to come in. I'm not well enough to come in. And after the 10th day of me not coming in, but it did cross a weekend. So it wasn't actually 10 days of not being at school. It was probably more like 7 days of not being at school. And on the second weekend, one of my best friends came around and broke not into my flat, but into the building, because I've got an entry system, and spoke through my mailbox and said, are you all right? Can you come to the door? And apparently I answered with, I'm not accepting visitors today. And that flagged up a red flag for her, because she thought, what the heck are you talking about? What do you mean you're not accepting visitors? She said, come to the door and let me in, speaking through the mailbox of the door.
So I'm just going to recap that so that I've got that correct. So you're at school. You're not at school. You're not feeling great.
Very well.
You're home.
I drove home. I don't remember driving home.
You don't remember driving home?
I don't remember driving home.
We think you were in bed.
Well, in fact, I wasn't in bed.
Okay.
I'd fallen onto the couch.
Okay.
And that's where I basically slumped into a heap. I had thrown up, and I had all sorts of other bodily functions happen, which I didn't know about either. But I did respond to the door but she knew something was wrong, and then she went and got 2 other friends and basically broke in, and I was sent straight to hospital because I had blood poisoning, I had septicemia, and it had gone up my leg, and they couldn't save my leg basically. And to save my life, which I apparently had 10 hours left to live, they had to amputate my leg that night, and they didn't think I was going to make it because I was so unwell. Basically on death's door. But I pulled through. And after I pulled through, about 10 days later, the vascular surgeon said, we did not think you were going to make it. And you must have a inner strength that has pulled you through this whole experience. And from that moment, I spent 5 months in hospital, but different hospitals.
And so when you gain consciousness and it's 10 days later.
My sister had flown in from Australia, who was also a trained sister, a trained nurse, and she was sitting by my bedside when I woke up.
And was that when you realised how serious everything was?
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea for the first. I was pretty out of it. That's probably the expression I could use. I woke up in the hospital. In fact, I woke up and I had some form of, it was soup that I apparently had when I came to, and they said, do you want something to eat? And I said, I'll have soup. I just still don't remember any of this. But my whole gown that you get given was covered in soup. That's all I could smell was whatever was on my gown. And my sister, who then was by my side, said, we need her changed immediately. And why wasn't this done earlier? So that's when I knew that something was seriously wrong, because I was uncoordinated. That's probably how I was uncoordinated in my thoughts and uncoordinated in my actions. So I couldn't eat properly. I couldn't sort of move or anything. It was a weird experience.
So what happens when you have gained some consciousness to be able to understand what you've just been through and how close you came to potentially death?
Well, for the first week, it took almost a week just to gain enough strength to sit up in bed or sit up in the hospital bed and actually then start eating food, or eating normally, I suppose. Yeah, for the first week, I think I was helped to eat. I was helped through everything. And it wasn't until the psychiatric team came in and did a psychological assessment to ask, had I tried to commit suicide, that I just kept saying, I don't understand. I fell ill. I had the flu. That's all I remember, is thinking I had the flu. And another friend flew in from Australia who was working in Japan at the time. And her first question was, how did you not know you were so unwell? And I said, I wasn't with it. That's how I could describe it. I didn't know that I wasn't well. I just thought I had the flu. And then when you look at the flu symptoms and then you line it up with the symptoms of septicemia, they are exactly the same.
And just to be clear, what is septicemia? In case anybody doesn't know.
Septicemia is technically a blood poisoning, and that's exactly. So I had an infection that led to blood poisoning, and it was that cut on my foot that basically the blood poisoning went up my leg, and that they've given me about 13 centimeters below the knee, and that's all they could give me. That was the maximum amount they could give me to give me a bit of a stump below the knee, because it's in terms of it. That's a good scenario, is giving you a little bit of leg below the knee in terms of fitting into a prosthetic leg.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you do start to understand what's happened, what are the thoughts that are going through your mind?
Well, the first was, I've lost everything. That's the first initial thoughts I had, is how am I going to work? How am I going to walk? And at this point, I was too weak to walk. I mean, I couldn't do any sort of movements for probably another 2 to 3 weeks after that. And then there was the talk of I had to move out of my home, that wasn't suitable. I live in a studio flat in a very lovely area. I overlook the park of Primrose Hill. And I just kept thinking, I don't want to move from where I live. I've really loved that flat. And I thought about driving. Every aspect of life kept going around and around. And at that point, I also had a blood clot in my right eye and I could not see. So I had blurred vision in the left eye and a blood clot in my right eye. And they kept saying it's from the septicemia and you have to wait at least 8 weeks before we can do anything. It turned out 5 months later that they finally addressed the blood clot as to why I couldn't see. And now I have constant eye issues from that's one symptom or one side effect of the septicemia, as I was left with the blood clot in the eye. So I have to be very careful now about obviously any form of blood clotting. So I'm on several drugs to make sure that I don't get any blood clots. Yeah. So it was the readjustment. Obviously, I had a class that had sent me loads of messages. And in fact, because I'd been teaching at the same school at that point for about 26 years, I had loads of past parents sending cards. I had like past pupils. I had a huge...
You had adult children. You had adult
I did,
students.
yes. Yeah. My oldest student now is 42 that I taught when I first arrived. Yes. Just turned 42 this year. So I had this huge pile of cards and letters and messages that I couldn't read. And because I couldn't feed myself, my sister, who had flown in from Australia, could only stay for the 10 days after I had come to. And she insisted that I had, for every meal service, someone was to come and sit with me so that I made sure that I could eat properly. And a rota was set up by the very good friend that I said used to push me in the wheelchair from my amputation unit to St Thomas's Hospital. She set up a rota, and my school was literally at the top of Hampstead and I was at the bottom of Hampstead. So I used to get TAs and teachers and all my teaching friends, as well as some ex-parents, used to come on a rota every mealtime for my entire month that I spent in the Royal Free Hospital to help me with all my meals.
How did that make you feel?
Well, I felt very loved, actually, and felt very cared for. I suppose in that first month, I was still not 100%, I'm going to say with it, it's probably not the right terminology, but I still was coming to terms with everything. And I didn't know then what a fantastic job my friend Arlene had done to help me through those
months.
Through those moments. In fact, I spent 6 weeks at the Royal Free before there was a decision made that I should go to a rehabilitation hospital, which was St Pancras, which I also knew was not far from Primrose Hill. So I used to drive past it all the time, not knowing that it was a rehabilitation hospital. And it probably wasn't until I got to the rehabilitation hospital that then I was better, but I wasn't better. I was better in myself. And then I had the same support network would visit. So every day there would be quite a few visitors that my friend Arlene monitored so that I wasn't overwhelmed with visitors, but there was somebody there again every day. And my other sister also flew in at that point once I was coming to the end of the Royal Free, and she stayed with me the first 3 weeks that I was in the rehabilitation hospital, not with me in the hospital, but she stayed at my friend's flat and then visited every day and stayed with me every day, all day.
So you had incredible people around you, and that's incredible. Like,
that's what got me through.
But what were you feeling for yourself?
I was feeling lost and grieving about my life.
Yeah.
That's actually what every day was like, a new situation that I needed to face. Obviously, as I got better, I was able to do more things for myself. And I'm talking like, in the first 6 weeks, I wasn't going to the toilet by myself. I was still having bed baths. Nothing was normal, or what we view as normal. So it probably wasn't till week 8 that's when I started to think, what's life going to be like beyond now? And obviously when you're laying in a hospital bed, it's hard to think, well, how am I going to get around? How am I going to be able to go back to school? Because my school has 187 steps from the ground floor to the top of the building. It's an old Victorian building built in 1906. And that just kept coming back to me every day. Well, how am I going to go to school? And how am I going to get...
That's because you've spent 23 years at this point teaching at this one school.
No, exactly. And I used to have the classroom at the very top of the building. And that was for nearly 17 years of the time that I was there. And then I moved downstairs to the very bottom of the building and I had a classroom just off the playground. And that was But even to get to the bottom of the school was another, I'm going to say 50 stairs. So that just kept coming into view, like, how am I going to just go to school and manage stairs?
Yeah.
Because I did know that the access to the school was also on a hillside. So not only is the access within the school difficult, but the school's actually on a hillside.
Yeah.
So getting to and from Hampstead was difficult in itself. So that probably kept coming back to, where am I going to live? What am I going to do for work? How am I going to get around? They're probably the things that just kept coming back every day.
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below. You're sitting in front of me, almost in smiles of memories, but I can imagine they're not.
Well, there was
memories.
lots of funny. I was smiling because there was lots of funny scenarios. You know, it wasn't all about doom and gloom, because I suppose the friends that would visit would make, this sounds horrible to say, but they would make fun that I had lost my leg. But I know that sounds terrible to say that, but it was making light of a terrible situation to try and get me over it. So I suppose when they were there, I put on a brave face. And I would just keep, I fought hard to be alive, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so every day I would do what you had to do, and you had to take part in like a rehabilitation program. I had to learn how to use a wheelchair, and then I had to learn how to transfer in the wheelchair and get in and out of a shower, and everything was a struggle. But because I felt so supported by my friends and family and extended community from the school, I felt I needed to go on, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. That's probably where I just found courage in those people. And it was about being resilient. I mean, every day at school, we had the 5 R's, and one of the 5 R's was resilience. And that just kept coming into my mind is I was resilient and then able to be resourceful. And then I was helped and supported by everybody so I could keep going. And then the amount of medical staff you meet when something like that happens, and the amount of times you have to retell your story to the various medical staff, the one thing that kept coming into my mind was, what will happen after I leave hospital? So I suppose I had to work through those things. But then the opportunity arose. Not everyone gets chosen to go to the amputation rehabilitation centre. You have to show willingness, and you have to show that you are going to work towards how life will be like outside of a hospital situation.
Right.
And even though the amputation centre was like a mini hospital, it was all about how you would live independently as an amputee. Yeah. And it was a fabulous centre, and I was there for 8 weeks. And you learnt, again, wheelchair skills. In fact, that very road that is outside these studios is where I learnt to go in and out of a cafe in my wheelchair and go to and from the centre in my wheelchair. And then I got my prosthetic leg, my first prosthetic leg there. And you did cooking skills and gardening skills, as well as support the other 12 people that are in the unit with you. Yeah. And that was almost, I'm going to say that was a life-changing experience, meeting the other 11 amputees that are in the centre with me, but also to see what a glimpse of what life would be like living independently at home.
what was it like for you to learn those skills?
It was the same thing again. It was like a new skill every day. Well, in fact, sometimes it was more than a new skill every day. It was basically learning to live with just your one leg, and try and make all of the things that you do. I'm going to use the word normal again, but it's probably not the right word, but of what you were used to.
Yeah.
It was like trying to get used to how life used to be, but now it's just with the one leg. Also, that wasn't an easy experience because I actually got a secondary infection in my amputated leg, my residual limb, and I had to be very careful. So, in fact, I couldn't wear a prosthetic leg because I had this constant infection, and it was being monitored, and I was on a lot of antibiotics, and just I had like lots of wound nurses come in, dress my leg. So I had to be careful with that.
Yeah.
And I had to be careful with the amount of exercise. And obviously they tried to get you up every morning. You had a routine. And in some ways that was really good because I had a routine at school. So in fact, I knew that if you had to be at breakfast at 8 o'clock and you had to be downstairs for the gym session at 10 or whatever, that was all good news to me because it fitted in with what I knew.
Doing.
I suppose every day was a battle and every day was, you can do it. That's what I had to say to myself. I can do this, and the light at the end of the tunnel will be, well, this is how life will be like when I leave.
Yeah.
So the first week there was hard. It was after spending nearly 3 months in a hospital situation where everything was done for you, it was now, what can you do for yourself? And you were helped. There was obviously medical staff on hand, and there was like a mini dining room, but it was great to do all of the other things. Like I said, they had a gardening program, and they had you cooked for each other once a week. You made breakfast. So there was a laundry on site. So you had to do your laundry. You had to learn how to cook.
So it was genuinely
learning. It was life skills with one leg. That's how I could describe it. As well as having physio, met the prosthetic technician. You did gym sessions to build up your muscles and just moving forward to just like, I mean, every day you would go walking, but obviously every day you were either in your wheelchair and then you might have been walking with one leg, or you're using a hand cycle machine as opposed to a bicycle. So it was relearning those skills.
Yeah. And using different muscles that you wouldn't have previously used.
Exactly.
By this point, you're 53.
Mm-hmm.
You are now learning to live life. You live on your own.
Mm-hmm. I do.
And so all of these life skills that you're learning are skills that you will have to use when you leave the rehabilitation centre and you start living life again. When you come home, what does it feel like?
Well, when I came home, as I said, I had a blood clot in my eye, and it was only detected 2 days before leaving the amputation unit that I had a blood clot and I needed an operation immediately. So I literally came home from the amputation unit. So this is 5 months into being in a hospital setting, and I went straight back into hospital. So I only had 1 day at home. Technically it was 2 because it was a weekend. And on that Monday, I was back in a hospital setting and I had the blood clot removed from my eye. And then I was able to see. But then that took a long time to be able to see properly. So in fact, I had a lot of home care at home. So my first 6 weeks at home, I had a home care lady that came twice a day to help me. And it also, my sister that had visited me while I was at the St Pancras Rehabilitation Hospital, she came back and spent 3 months, 12 weeks. She came back again and she lived with me for that 12 weeks to get me back into life in my flat.
what were some of the adjustments that you had to make in your flat?
Oh,
Because
loads.
you talked about
I had to
it
make
being-
loads of adjustments. I had to remove a door from the bathroom so I could get in and out of the bathroom door. My flat's small, and in fact, I have had loads of, even now 5 years on, I'm still having discussions about whether it's the right place for me to be. But yes, it is. I live on the 4th floor of a block of flats, and I overlook Primrose Hill Park. And if I can't go out for any reason, I can people watch, or I can watch nature looking out my window. I look right out of my window across to the top of Primrose Hill, and it's a really gorgeous location. And I have gone to look at other flats that are much more accessible, and they're designed, they've got a proper accessible bathroom and a proper accessible kitchen and a huge living area. And they've all been on the ground floor, and they've generally looked into a car park with no outside life to look at. And it just wasn't for me. That was my very first experience of thinking I would move from my flat that I'd lived in for nearly 15 years. And I just said, I can't move from there, because that was the one and only thing I had left.
Yeah.
I couldn't drive. I used to drive to school every day. Obviously, I couldn't walk. I was using a wheelchair. I couldn't see properly. I basically had lost everything, my job, because I wasn't working. I'd lost everything apart from the one thing, which was my flat. And my friends kept saying, but it's not suitable. And I said, but I can adapt. I'd already adapted in the last 5 months, and I'll make it suitable. So
I'll make this work.
I'll make this work. So I had loads of hospital equipment, from a commode to the only thing I didn't have was a hospital bed. But if you think of everything that came from the hospital, I had a walking frame, a wheelchair, a medical chair that you sit in. I had a raised bed. I had to have a bath board in the bath and a frame around the toilet, and lots of things to help me see. I still use a magnifying glass at the moment because I still have issues with my eyes. Everything that could be adapted was adapted, but I did have to remove doors to help me to do that.
And so if I listen to everything you've said, you've spent 53 years living a life.
Mm-hmm. A good life.
A great life. And then all of a sudden, overnight, literally,
you're right.
You wake up and it's changed. You've then spent 5 months adapting, learning, reliving. And there's got to have been dark times. But actually, as you retell your story, you tell it with laughter of all the little moments of hardship, but also all the people and the support that you've had. So when you initially told me you'd worked in a school for 27 years, I was like, oh my goodness. But actually, we fast forward those 23 years, and that was a lifeline, because that was the community that you built around you.
That's what I said, yeah.
And so let's now fast forward to today, and you've adapted. You know your way around, you know your limitations, you know what you can do, but that journey hasn't been easy.
No, and I still have quite a lot of medical appointments.
Yeah.
So another thing that happened from the side effect of the septicemia is I'm left with a kidney problem. So I've got chronic kidney disease. I still obviously have my eyesight issues. I think that's been the biggest worry for me, is because my left eye is still not stable, and there is the possibility I could go blind. I've got an implant in there at the moment helping. I've got a macular edema at the moment in that eye, but it's not stable, so I have to be very conscious of caring for that. But that's hindered my walking in terms of my balance and looking down. So I've been on my leg. I have my 3rd or 4th prosthetic leg actually now. I've been on my leg, off my leg, on my leg, off my leg. So it hasn't been an easy journey. Just if you meet other amputees who probably were younger than me, and maybe they had one problem and they lost their leg, they've been much more adapted to being on their prosthetic leg. Whereas I have been on my prosthetic leg, and then I've had another injury, or I have had a couple of falls. I've fractured my hand, fractured my stump. And so that prosthetic journey has been probably my biggest issue alongside the other medical problems that I have. So it has that hasn't been easy because I'm still constantly, even now, going to appointments. I'm now in this another process where I've been going to the gym to build up strength of my right leg, which needs a knee replacement because I've got osteoarthritis of that knee, and going off to the eye hospital to get my eyes sorted so that I can see better. So I don't fall over where because I can't see certain things like black on black or grey on grey. I find that very hard. So when you're walking and you can't see black on black, or you can't see the raised pavement because it's grey on grey, it's
challenging.
It's very challenging.
But you haven't let this stop you.
I haven't let it stop me. And as I said, I had that fantastic support network 5 years ago, and I actually still have that really good support network even today.
So one of the things that you told me that was really important to you, and when I say you haven't let it stop you, you've actually been traveling, because that was a really important part of who you are.
I used to travel every holiday. That was my big thing. And I've been around the world, a couple of times, for many more. That's a song, Australian song. And that actually, when I was at one of my eye hospital appointments with my friend that used to push me in the wheelchair from the amputation unit to St. Thomas's, I just started to cry one day, and she said, "What's happened? What's made you just start to cry?" And I said, I just can't travel now. That was what initially made me start to cry. I said, I don't really care about where I live. I don't really care about anything, but what I do care about is, how am I going to travel now? That was the big question. How am I going to travel now? And for the first sort of year after the amputation, that was always constantly on my mind. But we ended up entering into the coronavirus period, which was nearly for 2 years. So in fact, travel stopped for everyone. And in fact, just travel from home to work stopped as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was the first time I felt like, oh, I'm in the same boat as everybody else now, where, oh, I'm stuck at home. I had been stuck at home for that couple of months while I was out of the hospital and going off to rehabilitation, and that all stopped, March 20. And but that was the first time I thought, oh, I'm in the same boat as everybody else. Nobody's traveling, and you couldn't travel. And I felt good at that point. And in fact, in some ways, being stuck at home along with everybody else actually helped me to think, this is life for everybody.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat as everybody else. So there's nothing different or special about me at this point.
And as we came out of coronavirus, and by that time, I had started to become stronger in terms of my health. And then stronger with the same feelings as everybody else. And we're all emerging. So it wasn't just I had the fear of going out by myself. I had people that didn't want to go out because of coronavirus. They didn't want to go out either. So it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
And that helped me a lot. And then the same sister that came for 12 weeks when I first came out of the amputation unit, she came back literally when you could fly out of Australia, which was the beginning of March 2022. That's right. You could just start to fly out of Australia at Christmas of 21. So March 22, I was going to have a big knee operation, which I ended up finding out that I had low hemoglobin thanks to my kidney. It doesn't produce a hormone called erythropoietin, and I have to take an injection every 2 weeks to boost my hemoglobin. And my hemoglobin was well too low, and I could not have the big operation that they wanted me to have, because I would have been susceptible to A, septicemia, and B, just not come through the operation. Yeah. So that couldn't happen. And so we decided that we would do a trip and we would do a cruise, because I thought a cruise would be a way that I didn't have to get on a plane, but I could get on a ship
Yeah.
And I did the Queen Mary 2, and I did the transatlantic to New York, and then it went on to the Caribbean, and then we did another ship around the Caribbean, and then a ship back to the UK. And that was, I'm going to say, my savior. There was like a light at the end of the tunnel that was beaming for me at that point. That's probably how I could describe it. It was a bit like the sun had come up.
Yeah.
And so the darkness I had felt about how am I going to travel, suddenly the light came up and I was doing it, and I loved every minute of it. And it was the first cruise my sister had ever done. I had cruised before.
But it gave you hope.
It gave me hope that actually life is going, not that life wasn't good. Listen, I was, I pretty much was going off to medical appointments constantly. And now I still do that, but it's much less. And it was hope that life would be different to before, obviously different to going to school every day, waking up, having that routine of going to school and, teaching all day with that routine. It was a different routine, but a good routine. And I could see that life would be different. And I'd made that decision that I would retire. And that was it. Just before the Christmas, November of 21, I was granted ill health retirement from the teacher's pension. And that's when life changed, that I could see myself living independently and not going to work, but enjoying life in a different way. And then that cruise was like the light that was shining at the end of the tunnel. And when I came back, my sister said, "You've done really well on this cruise." Or it wasn't just the one cruise, it was back-to-back cruises. And she said, "I think you should fly back to Australia with me and experience getting on a plane." And she was with me for 3 months. So I did do that. And I got on a plane with her, and that was a whole new experience yet again.
Yeah.
So
it was just experience after experience at this point, and learning to adapt to what you had learned
adapting.
before.
And it comes back to being resilient again.
Yeah.
It's finding the resources. I still needed the support. I don't think I would have done it if my sister didn't suggest it or say, "You're doing it."
Yeah.
I think that was the biggie. It was like, yeah, I think we should do it and just book it, and we're going to do it. And then it's finding out how
to do it and figure it out as you're on the journey.
It. Exactly.
You spent 5 months in hospital, and I'm sure you've got some funny stories to share and tell. But for other people who are going through this, what are your 3 takeaways that you'd like people listening to the podcast to go away with?
I think you never know what life's going to throw at you. I think that's number 1. And you have to accept whatever life throws at you, there are always solutions to overcome whatever's happened. I'd also take any help and support and advice, and it's the support from others that really helps you get through. And I think just talking about life in general and what may happen or what could happen can only happen if you have faith in yourself and believe in yourself and have the courage to carry on. I think that's probably what I would say. And I mean, at this stage now is I'm able to help others. Obviously, I take part in a support group, an amputee support group, and that's once every 2 months at the moment, but it used to be face-to-face. And I'm at a stage now where I feel I can help others, because when this happened to me, it was all new. In fact, I didn't know what life was going to be like. And if I'd met someone like me now 5 years ago, I think I wouldn't have had the darker times, because I could look at them and think, 5 years from now, I can see what life will be like. It will be different to how it was, but it will be good.
Yeah.
Yes.
And is that how you would describe your life today? Good?
Yeah, I think I've got quite a good life. I try and go out every day and do something, even if I sit in the park and watch the greenery appear on the trees. Just get out there and enjoy it. Enjoy life, in whatever state that is.
What do you do for your mental health today?
Well, I like to go for my mental health, I love going to the cinema. I probably could go to the cinema every day of the week if there was something to see and I had the time, but I have to factor everything in terms of my medical appointments. And I want to say that I try and listen to music, but I always fall asleep. And I try and just watch mindless TV, and that also sends me to sleep. But mainly it's probably being over in the park, because I live opposite the park. So it's either looking at the park, looking at nature, or being in the park. And also I've got a lovely garden, and it's just listening to the birds and the calmness of the nature around me. That's what I enjoy probably the most, is I can just sit in my garden, or I can sit in the park and just watch nature or listen to it. That's probably the best.
Amazing. We started this conversation with who is Julie, and I'd love to go back to that. And based on the conversation, is there anything you would change and adapt to who is Julie?
Who is Julie? Well, Julie's a retiree now, who I think just enjoys making the most of any situation. So if an invitation arises to go to, for instance, I went to a bar mitzvah the other Saturday, I would probably not have done that a few years ago. If you can travel, go and travel. That's probably my other best thing in life to do. And it could be just to travel on a train to Brighton and spend the day on the beach.
Yeah.
So what's still me, just in a slightly different form, missing half a leg and traveling in a different way, to jumping in my car and driving off somewhere, because now I generally jump on a bus and they drive off somewhere. Just make the most of life. That's it.
What an incredible journey. Thank you for sharing it with us today. And I hope people are inspired by the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow, and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning, and play. You are a class of your own.